How many of you are familiar with the Jameson family? Kathy and Paul are married, and they have a son, Adam, and there is Sean, the eccentric brother, and Marlene, the grouchy neighbor. They are actually the cast of a new, very popular TV series that's called The Big C. And it's quite a novel series, since it deals with a rather taboo subject, and that is cancer. And that's what the Big C stands for. And it deals with it in a very serious and yet a very funny and humorous manner. The great actress Laura Linney plays Kathy Jameson. She's a woman who has no understanding of herself until she gets this diagnosis, and then her mission is to discover who she really is. As so often is the case, it takes a crisis to wake us up. The lyrics of the title song are interesting. It starts off saying, "It's so hard to turn your life over, step out of your comfort zone. It's so hard to choose one direction when your future is unknown." The Advent season is one that challenges us to turn our lives over, to step out of our comfort zone and make choices even when our future is unknown. This first Sunday of the Advent season, as we just heard, challenges us to wake up. The author of Romans tells us to throw off the works of darkness, and Jesus in that Gospel of Matthew says, "You do not know which day your Lord will come, so stay awake." The Big C is funny, but heart-wrenching. It has all the complexities of real life. The main character, Kathy, played by Laura Linney, has always been conservative and structured, the very perfect suburban housewife. And now her cancer diagnosis is a catalyst for waking up, a catalyst for change. She basically has become unglued, but unglued in a very healthy way, and she begins to reach out to all the people in her life. She's determined to make deeper connections with them. Her husband, Paul, is an overgrown kid. Her son, Adam, is a selfish and snotty teenager whose favorite pastime is faking massive injuries simply to freak out his mom. Then there is her brother, who is hilariously eccentric and homeless. He's an aggressive environmentalist who likes harassing people who drive SUVs, and he hangs himself from trees with a string of plastic bags in busy shopping centers. And then, of course, Marlene. She is the cantankerous neighbor who is sitting across the street, just sitting and waiting to die. Kathy realizes that she doesn't have all the time in the world anymore. And so she confronts all these people. It's funny and it's serious. And it's also a story about Advent hope. It's a story about never giving up. It's a story about accepting the limitations and disappointments of life and being at peace with them. The great spiritual writer Richard Rohr reminds us in his book, Hope Against Darkness, that we grew up expecting far too much from life, expecting that life would be fair and there would be no crises. But the tragic and the broken and the sinful, they are intrinsic realities, and when we deny or run away from these realities, we actually suffer more. Rohr points out in his book that people in the third world actually have a much more honest expectation of reality. They have a more properly shaped ego. It's because their reality is filled with brokenness in shattered hopes and shattered dreams. We in the West have gotten away with a false entitlement where we did not weave the tragic into our worldview. And because of that, we do suffer. Rohr actually points out that the poor in the third world tend to smile a lot more than the middle class or the wealthy in any country. Now, in this TV series, The Big C, Kathy Jameson begins to face the darkness of life. She begins to face a world of contradictions and inconsistencies within her and between she and her family and friends. And because the show is not just about cancer, it's also about the light and darkness of her family and her friends. She begins to realize it's a far from perfect world, but she begins to see her world filled with possibilities and filled with hope. Now, this is certainly not stated in this TV show, but there definitely is an underlying Christian theme. And the Christian theme is that there's a cruciform reality to all life, that the world is filled with contradictions that need to be reconciled, that there is always some crisis that we are dealing with. We cannot always escape crisis. We're surrounded by them. The midlife crisis, the quarter life crisis, the financial crisis, the national crisis, the global crisis, the value crisis, the job crisis, the marriage crisis, the Christmas shopping crisis. All of these crises fill us with fear, and fear without hope leads to despair. And sometimes the holidays just serve to exacerbate these problems. Our crises seem to get bigger at Christmas time. There's more stress, more family, more money. And maybe it's the first holiday without. And you all know who's missing at the table. Speaking of crises, remember that great scene from the movie City Slickers with Billy Crystal? He's having a midlife crisis. He goes into his little boy's classroom and he becomes unglued. And remember what he says to those little kids? He says, "Value this time in your life, kids, because this is the time in your life when you still have your choices. It goes by so fast. When you're a teenager, you think you can do anything, and you do. Your 20s are a blur. 30, you raise your family, you make a little money, and you think to yourself, what happened to my 20s? 40s, you grow a little pot belly, you grow another chin. The music starts to get too loud. One of your old girlfriends from high school becomes a grandmother. The 50s, you have minor surgery. You call it a procedure, but it's surgery. The 60s, you'll have a major surgery. The music is still loud, but it doesn't matter because you can't hear it anyway." Remember that scene when he talks to those little kids? Anyway, what's the Chinese symbol for crisis? Danger or opportunity? The yin and the yang of life, the light and darkness. Life does have its limits. It has its contradictions. It has its inconsistencies. And we must face them all and not run away from them. Life has its light and darkness. And the Advent season reminds us of this reality, but it also says to us, the people who have walked in darkness have seen a great light. And that is our hope. And we do not lose hope. Rather, by facing the contradictions of life, we become better people, happier people, more whole. The Jameson family is really a peek into some of the parts of our lives. Kathy Jamison has become unglued because she is facing a crisis in her life, but she's becoming unglued in a healthy way. She's seeing life for what it really is and not giving up on it, but she makes the best of it. And that title song, it's so hard to turn your life over, step out of your comfort zone. It's so hard to choose one direction when your future is unknown. But we do have the Advent promise that in the midst of the darkness there is light, and that light will never be put out. Back in the 1940s, when Winston Churchill was the #1 man in the British Empire, he addressed an Oxford graduating class. Now, when the great man stepped up to the microphone, usually, you know, most commencement addresses are long and dull, like some homilies. But Churchill looked over the crowd of the young faces and he said this. He said, "Never, never, 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 never give up." He turned and walked back to his seat. That was all he said.